Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Allahumma salli wa sallam wa barak ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala ahli al-bayt al-kirami wa ashabihi mukhlisin wa tabain wa tabaihim wa awliya Allah salihin wa ulama muttaqin wa shuhada mutahharin wa jami'a mashaykhina wa rabbina mashayidina ila Allah ta'ala. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun wa salamun ala mursaleen walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen wa amma ba'd. قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتاب مبين بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم وبسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ربي اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي صدق الله العظيم. This is a dua of Sidna Musa alayhi salam when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered him to go and to speak to Firaun. And of course Musa had a speech impediment and stuttered, and his tongue was turned on itself. So he said, Rabbi Ishrah li sadri, make this thing easy for me. Rabbi Ishrah li sadri wa yassir li amri. Make wahlul min lisani yafqahu qawli, and untie this knot from my tongue so that people will understand me. So I hope, because I've come down with a sickness, I hope that Allah will untie the knot from my tongue as well, and you will be able to understand me. He also said on the tongue of Sidna Musa, Rabbi Zidni ilmin, O Allah, increase me in knowledge. So I hope that what I'm able to give will explain what I've been trying to say over these series of lectures. A very close friend and a person who has been listening to these talks came to me the other day after listening to one of them and said that, you should be careful. Everybody's going to think you're a Shia or Shi. And I told him, I've tried to make clear that I'm not a Sunni and I'm not a Shia, I'm a Sufi. I'm specifically a Shadhali Sufi from the Green Mountain branch. And so far as the establishment aspect of both Sunniism and Shiism, in this time, I think manifestly they're bankrupt, as I've tried to make clear in these talks. And the proof of that is their actions in Syria and in Iraq and in Afghanistan and in Somalia and various other places where Muslims have been killing other Muslims. And we're specifically told by the Prophet ﷺ that Muslims, the nature of being a Muslim is that Muslims, fellow Muslims, blood is sacred, and their honor is sacred, and their family is sacred, and their wealth is sacred, and so on and so forth. Yet on both of these sides of the establishment, I must say, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the Islamic Republic of Iran, both of which are self-proclaimed Islamic states, have been acting not like Muslims at all, and have in fact gone against everything that a Muslim is supposed to be on both sides. And so for that reason I say I'm not a Sunni and I'm not a Shi'i, but you don't see the Sufis attacking these people or the Sufis attacking those people, because they believe that the basis of the teaching of Islam is on what Allah said regarding the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَكَ لِرَحْمَةٍ لِلْعَالَمِينَ, I did not send you save as a mercy to all people. So Sufi people, and the word Sufi is also kind of a made-up word. Really, we're followers of Sidna Ali, because you see, like for instance here, I don't know if you can see this on screen. This is happens to be my particular silsila, and it starts with after Jibril, after Allah and Jibril and Muhammad, and then it comes to Ali. peace be upon them all. And then it goes, generation after generation after generation until it's like a tree growing, until it comes to this poor person who is on that tree. And so rather than to say that I'm a Sunni or a Shi, I would tell them, you can apply to me through my website or look at the book Orisons, and you can find a copy of that silsila. So I want to make sure that you all understand that I'm not trying to push any one agenda, either a Shia agenda or a Sunni agenda, but the agenda of al-haq, the people of truth, the followers of Din al-Haq, of which Allah says the Din al-Haq liyudhhiruhu ala dini kulli, the Deen of truth will shine forth above all other religions in the world, and that's what I believe. And I regard Ali alayhi salam as the first teacher in this school, and I tried to make clear in the number of the other talks that one thing that's not understood particularly by Sunnis, and in a way also by Shia, but in a different way, is the understanding that Nubuwah, or revelation, is one half of the story, and Wilayah, or teaching, or just call it teaching, is the other half of the story. For instance, if I were to take, here I have a copy of the Musaf, a copy of the Quran here next to me. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. A copy of the Quran next to me. And I would challenge almost anybody listening to these talks, whether they be native Arab speaking or speakers of another language, to explain to me what's inside this Mus'haf. What does it mean? And by and large, for the most part, I would say probably 80% of the people who consider this the bedrock of their belief, the Mus'haf, the bedrock of their belief, the Quran, the bedrock of their belief, can't even read it. They don't even know what the words say in the original. So they rely upon translation. And translation changes all the time. So that's not really something that is really credible. And so how are they going to understand it? So if you would think for a second that this is another book, this is a book on astrophysics, let's say, and I gave you this book of astrophysics, and whether you came from anywhere in the world, the majority of people who looked at it would not understand what it said. If they got it in English and they were English speaking, they would understand if, and, by, but, the, for, and common words, yes. But what was astrophysics? They wouldn't know. In order for them to know, they would need a teacher. And the same way, if you want to understand what Allah has said, you need a teacher. You can't do it without a teacher. So, Nubuwah is the act of the wahy, the act of the revelation. But as Allah says, He created all things in pairs. The mate of Nubuwah is Wilayat. And Wilayat has many, many, many meanings, even such as friend or teacher or protector, or all those things that a real teacher is for you. When you think of a real teacher, I don't mean people who teach you just simply technical things, but a real teacher. A wali, a friend of Allah, and your friend. You need that person to explain to you what it means. And even though maybe you spend 10, 20 years with them and you understand up to this point, even when you reach to this point, you may have to go to find another teacher to explain more to you, because it's a very, very deep and intricate subject. Yes, of course, there are things that are simple to understand, like we don't eat pig and we don't drink wine or beer or stuff like that, and we behave ourselves sexually and so on and so forth like that. We put our glances at the ground when we see a beautiful woman walk by, and so on and so forth. We do those things because Allah has commanded them. We pray 5 times a day. We fast in the month of Ramadan. We pay our zakat. We try to make hajj. These are the outward, zahri forms of it, but also there's the batini forms of these things, of getting up in the middle of the night and praying and fasting during the week on Mondays and Thursdays, and many other things like that. All together, we need help to understand what to do and how to do it. And for that, we need a teacher. So all of this, the things that I'm speaking on are based that you have to have the understanding that, yes, like Umar said, well, we have the book. Well, yes, we do. We have the book. Here's the book. I'll show it to you again. Here's the book. Alhamdulillah, all in one piece. But the understanding of it is a lifetime's effort. And for that, we need somebody who has greater understanding than us and who will help us to understand what its meaning is. So when that person came to me and said to me, well, you better be careful about what you say, because people are going to think you're a Shia, even as though that was some kind of curse in any case, which it's not. Because, of course, the very first madhab is the madhab of Jafar Sadiq, alayhi salam, who was the teacher of Shafi and Maliki, and also Abu Hanifa, radiallahu ta'ala anhum, the very first madhab, if you like. And as I mentioned yesterday, that Sheikh Shaltut, who was the Sheikh of Azhar in the 1940s and early 50s, issued a fatwa that there are 5 schools of jurisprudence, and I'm one of those people who totally agree that there are 5 schools of jurisprudence, and that people who refuse to look at who Jafar Sadiq was and what he gave and who he taught, and that he taught Imam Shafi and Imam Malik and also Abu Hanifa, though he wasn't like a full-time teacher of Abu Hanifa, but Abu Hanifa would attend his classes. It's not a curse to be a Shia in any sense of the means of it, though. In the world in which we live, that's the way things have become. Because that's where the teaching comes from in the beginning. So even I have this problem that, when I'm giving a khutbah and I talk about Imam Ali, and I say alayhi salam, or I mentioned Fatima, and I say alayha salam, and people have come to me afterwards and they ask me right out, are you some kind of Shia or something like that? And I tell them, brother, because it's usually the brothers who ask me this question, I say, brother, when we make tahiyyat, we say assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum, salatu salam ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi. So we say salam ala alihi wa ashabihi wa alayhi wa salam. But we say assalamu alaikum ya Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa barak ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi. So my saying salat on these people should not be construed in any other way other than every Muslim says that in his salat or her salat every day. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala ali. So, so that's actually why, and I mention all this not as a digression, because that's what today's talk is about, which is how did we get to here from where we were? How do we get here? How do we reach this point where helicopters are flying in the air and dropping bombs, Muslims and helicopters are dropping bombs on other Muslims, or Muslims in jet planes, supplied by the Americans, of course, are bombing other Muslims in Yemen. It's a Muslim pilot bombing Muslim people on the ground, because there's very few non-Muslims in Aden or in anywhere, indeed, in Yemen, except for people who we should be thankful to, who are doctors and so on and so forth, who may have gone to help in those places. So how did we reach this point of Muslims killing Muslims? But then when we read history, because sad part of the story is that Muslims are, for the most part, or a large part, are very unaware of their history. And you know that the saying goes, those who do not know history are obliged to repeat it. And so this killing of other Muslims and so on and so forth is not something that's new. This went on during the time of the succession by Muawiyah, who declared himself to be a king, essentially putting an end to anything called, any idea of, you know, a righteous Khulafa Rashidun, when he declared himself to be a king. Because remember what Allah said about that. He said, indeed, in 27:34, he said, indeed, kings, when they enter a city, they ruin it, and they render the honor of its people to be nothing. Or another translation, kings, when they enter a township, they ruin it and make the honor of the people shame. Or another translation, kings, when they enter a country, despoil it and make the noble of its people the lowest. And that's the way they behave. And another translation, surely kings, when they enter a town, ruin it and make the noblest of its people to be low. And this they always do. Or again, when kings enter a town, they destroy it and disrespect its honorable people. This is what they do. This is a number of different translations in Quran about kings. So how anybody who was a Muslim would think to call themselves a king, or to name their country, as the people which I hope to talk about today in Saudi Arabia have done, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, are mad, obviously. Mad, because if Allah says, if you want to ruin a country, you invite the kings come, and then these people dare to call themselves kings. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. So how did we get to this point? And so my belief, because yesterday I talked about these things, which again I want you to understand is not from any kind of partisan viewpoint, either Shi'i or Sunni, of what happened at Ghadir al-Kham and what happened at, you know, when Sidna Abu Bakr was proclaimed the first Khalifa by Umar. From then till now, how did we get to here? And we can argue in some ways that the Khulafa of Sidna Abu Bakr and Umar and Sidna Uthman and Sidna Ali, something that, you know, there was good in what they did. And certainly there was good in what they did. But again, if you please go back and listen to that thing, to the talk that I gave, people were not prepared for that. And that people go on and they talk about elections and voting and shura and all of these things. They even talk about it from the mimbar. And there was no such thing. The Prophet ﷺ never mentioned anything like that. Didn't train people for that. And he always trained people as to what to do. So that the whole thing of the Khulafat Rashidun is suspicious in itself, because specifically of what happened at Ghadir al-Kham. And this is not, again, from a Shi'i perspective or a Sunni perspective, because you find hadith from both sides that mention this thing, in which the Prophet ﷺ, after completing his farewell Hajj, had received a wahi on his way back to this place called Ghadir al-Kham, which was like a swampy place where the people would make sure the camels got water for their way back, that he told, Allah told him that you have to tell them everything. And he had thought he told them everything in his farewell khutbah that he gave on Jabal al-Rahmah at the time of the end of the Hajj, but it seemed he had left something out. And so what he told the people was, first of all, he told them, he said, Ana Madinat al-Ilm, I'm the city of knowledge. And Ali, who he had brought to stand next to him, he's the door to that knowledge. This is mindful of the fact that he's going to die. He knows he's going to die, and he's known that for 2 years, because he's a man. We're not like any of these other religions. We don't believe our prophet is a god or something like that, or a son of a god or anything like that. He's a man who Allah selected to deliver a message to us. But as a man or a woman, he has to or she has to die, because that's the nature of life and death. And I tried to show that how, given his nature and how careful he was about everything he did, that he would not have left this small growing community on its own. He had to leave somebody who would continue it, knowing also that that person in turn would also have to die, and that he would have to understand how to go about teaching people how to do that. And that's what Ali had done, alayhi salam, all of his life. He lived his life with the Prophet, alayhi salam. He learned from him. He asked questions of him. He was there when the wahi came. He was there night and day. As he said, there was no roof that he and his wife lived under, that the Prophet and his wife lived under, peace be upon them, that he was not the third person who lived under them. He knew everything about him. And yes, Abu Bakr was his best friend. Of course he was his friend. But if you think yourself, you know, like your friend knows a lot about you. But think about your kids. Your kids know a lot more about you than your best friend does, because they're with you day and night. They know you can't fake with your kids. You can smile at people on the street and be nice and jovial and kind and all those things, but your kids know you better than anybody else. And Ali was always there, alayhi salam. And so he knew from the Prophet, and he was taught from the Prophet. And it was not a question of voting about something. It wasn't a question of sure about something or anything like that. This was the person who was trained to take over the community upon the death of the Prophet, alayhi salam. And Allah says in the Quran, Ati Allah wa Ati Rasul, obey Allah and obey His Rasul. And the Muslim people of that time, the best of them, Abu Bakr and Umar, did not do what he said to do. They disobeyed him. And when I asked the question, how did we get here from there? We got here on the basis of disobedience. Those people dropping bombs and killing other Muslims and so on and so forth are a direct result of the disobedience of Abu Bakr and Umar. I know people don't like to hear that, and I say, radiyallahu ta'ala anhum, I respect them. I would never curse them. They did what they thought was the best thing for the community. I have no doubt about that. But they disobeyed the Prophet when he stood up at Ghadr al-Qam and he says, whose wali I am, Ali is his wali. And that as Sufi people, that's what we believe. Or better than Sufi, which is a name that people have made up, of people of al-Haq, who we are. We believe that the Prophet ﷺ trained Ali from the time he was a boy who came to live in his house with him, to take over the leadership of the community, which he did. But he was prevented from doing it in its full-blown sense. And so he said, alhamdulillah, because that was his nature. When Abu Bakr or Umar or Uthman came to him, he always tried to help them. He never cursed them. Those people who cursed them, shame on them. They forgot what the Prophet said, when they asked him to curse some people, he said, I was not sent here to curse people. I was sent here to bring blessings upon people. That's the Prophet, one who's sent to bring blessings upon people, not to curse people. So we don't curse them at all. We have nothing to do with those people who make lanet upon those people who tried to help the community in the best way that they knew how. But they made a mistake. And human beings, we all make mistakes. And their mistake was what? They did not obey the Prophet. He says, I'm your wali, I'm your teacher. And after me, he's your teacher. That makes sense. And when you look at this little list that I showed you like this, you go down this list like this, you find generation after generation after generation who belong to that school, who have done the same thing and have been trained by their teachers on how to teach other people. And not only that, they don't go around saying that just because they think that in their heads, but because their teachers designate them. That's called idhan. They give them idhan to be teachers. If anybody comes to you and they say, well, I'm Sheikh so-and-so, or Peer so-and-so, or something like that, and say, prove it. Show me your ijazah. Show me your idhan. Let me see it. Don't say, oh, I had a dream, or, well, maybe if you're an Owaisi, maybe that's possible. But that's very rare, and I'm suspicious of it in any case. But Owaisi was true, radiallahu ta'ala anhu. And the Prophet knew, alayhi who he was and everything about him, and Ali and Umar visited him later on. So, as that goes, but that is the basis of our belief, that we follow those who are trained to teach us. That my teacher was trained to be a teacher, and his teacher was trained to be a teacher, and his teacher was trained to be a teacher, and so on and so forth like that. And that's how I learned what I know, because I had no way of knowing what I know. I wasn't brought up to know this or anything like that. I had to be taught about it, as anybody does. So when this man, Muawiyah, reached a certain point in his career, I mean, at a certain point, he did things which were useful for the Muslim community, and there's no doubt about that. His struggle with the Byzantines and so forth like that, he did good in what he was able to do. And we have to be thankful to him for doing what he did. But he reached a certain point in his thing, and that is that we know, and it's a very well-known saying, at least in English language, power corrupts. And absolute power corrupts absolutely. And he was not a man who was trained by the Prophet ﷺ. He was given positions of responsibility by the Prophet ﷺ, indeed. He was given positions of responsibility by the Khulafat Rashidun, yes, but he was not trained in the same way. He was not a trained teacher. He didn't know what he was doing, in truth. And he reached a point in his career and in his life when the power went to his head. Because, as I say, or as the saying goes, power corrupts. And absolute power corrupts absolutely. And it corrupted him. And he declared himself a king. And that was the end of the Khulafat Rashidun. There was no Khulafat after that. It was not possible. Even after he had made the deal with Sidna Hassan, alayhi salam, and he welched on that deal with him, he appointed his son to be a leader, his son who was a drunkard, a player of horses, a player of women, many other things, known by both Sunnis and Shias to be such. Because mind you, there were no Shias at that time. There were only Muslims at that time. The Shia thing is something later on, when lines were more closely drawn. So this is how we got to where we are now. And these people, if you examine them, you say, okay, you want to talk about him. Who was his father? Anybody in the audience can tell me who was the father of Muawiyah? Hello? Nobody knows? Excuse me? Abu Sufyan, very good. We have somebody who knows some history, Abu Sufyan. And what was the name of Abu Sufyan's wife? Anybody know? Hind? Does that name come to you? Hind? And what did Hind arrange to do? And when did they become Muslim exactly? They became Muslim at the last second, when the Prophet ﷺ had entered into Mecca. and took the thing from the people, took it from them, and didn't even want to see Hind ever again. But he forgave her, but didn't want to see her because of what she had done. These were the people who were the absolute enemies of the Prophet ﷺ, all through his life. Abu Sufyan was the enemy, the sworn enemy of the Prophet ﷺ. He fought him in every war that he could fight him in. He tried to kill him over and over again. Don't ever forget that. And that's why Yazid, who's the grandson of him, when they had cut the head off Sayyidina Hussein alayhi salam, and he took a stick, a riding crop they're called, what you hit your horse with to make it go, and he smacked him across the face with his decapitated head. You want to know where you talk about these people, the Daesh and ISIS and ISIL or whatever the names that they give them, where they come from? That's where they come from. They've been at it a long time, my friends, long time. Nothing new. Nothing new. And he smacked him across the face and he said, I have avenged the battle of Badr. I have avenged my kinfolk. And I am witness that there is no wahi. There is no revelation. Muhammad was a man like any other man. That's all. There was nothing to it. And we have always been the people of command, and we are back in the seat again. Or words to that effect. That basically is what he said. That's according to Sayyidah Zainab, radiallahu ta'ala anha wa alayha salam, who were indebted to know actually what happened in Karbala. For were not for Zainab alayha salam, I'm afraid that many of the things that happened in Karbala would have been lost to us. But bless her for what she did forever. Ameen. So after that, we had a struggle. They continued for a while, these people called Bani Umayyad, this kingly reign, what I don't know what you call a dynasty. Dynasty, I think that's the correct word for it. The dynasty of the Umayyads, until the arising of the Abbasids, who claimed that they were connected to the family of the Prophet ﷺ and tried to pull the wool, or as it were, over the eyes of the imams and so on and so forth like that, that they were actually on the side of the imams. But they were after one thing: power, power, power. So then we had a war, just like we have a war now. We had a war between the Abbasids and between the Umayyads. And things went on, and many smaller things and larger things, and we had the Fatimis, and we had the Seljuks, and we had all these things, until finally there arose yet another major dynasty in the Islamic world, that of the Osmanis, the people of Turkey. And and they're held to be of very high repute, by the way, but I mean, how, they used to have harems. Of course, mutta had been forbidden, but that didn't stop them. And they had many wives. The Sultan had many wives. The Khalifa had many wives. And you know what happens when you have wives? You have children. Well, they let the girls live because the girls were no threat, because the girls were not going to become the rulers of the country. But the boys, every last one of them except one and two, they killed. Oh, they did it in a very nice way. They used to go with a silken pillow. They had a special person who acted as an executioner. These are these noble Turkish Muslims. Yes. Noble? I don't think so, really. Muslim? I wonder. And they would smother these young boys at the age of a year, so that there would be no power struggle between the sultan and a number of young men. They didn't want that to happen. So they killed the children of the ruler. So there would be only one boy and one ruler. So if the ruler got killed, because part of their thing was that they had to lead every year in battle against the kuffar, and they might get killed because they had to be, it was part of the law of the Turkish dynasty, the Osmans, that the leader, the sultan, and they were noble people in many ways, where they had sharaf, honor and character. They would always lead the troops from the front line. Their horse would be the first horse in the line. They were not like the cowards of today who sit back in their offices in Washington and Moscow and various other places and tell young, innocent boys, go get killed. They went in the front line and led their troops. So there's many good things to say about them in that level. But they stood, as a result of that, a good chance of being killed. So they kept this one boy in a place which is now a museum in which all the beautiful things of the Prophet and holy relics of the Prophet ﷺ are kept, called Topkapi. That was actually a prison, a very high-level prison for these youth. So what are we talking about here? These people talk about the glory of these various dynasties and so on and so forth, and how Muslim they were and so on and so forth. I don't think so. Not when you look at it. How did they get their rulers and things like that? I don't mean the ruler. I mean the mayors of their towns and the people who kept the books and the soldiers and the teachers. You know how they did that? Every town in the empire, according to its size, had to give so many young boys every year to the empire, to the dynasty. They would come every spring and they would take the quota. If you had 1,000 people in town, it would be some quota. If you had 10,000 people in that town, it would obviously be a larger quota. And these boys were taken at the age of 4 or 5. And they were brought to Istanbul, still called Constantinople, by the way, which it was up until the time of Ataturk. And there they were educated. They got their basic education. They had no moms and they had no dads. They had one mom and one dad. And that was the dynasty. Bust. And like in the German system of education, who actually took it from the Turks, after a while you could see where they belonged. So some of them became soldiers. Those were called Janissary. They were the soldiers. Some of them became teachers and educators and so on and so forth like that. They became the ulama from alim. And of course, they were religiously oriented. So they were religious educators, but they educated in all of the subjects. And Turkey was a very advanced, or the dynasty was very advanced on that level. Or they took them to be civil administrators, bureaucrats, apparatchiks, I think they call it in Russia. And these people became the mayors of towns and the keepers of the records, or the daftaris who took record books between here and there and so on and so forth. And they were trained like that. And they could never, and they could marry. They were allowed to marry, all of these things. But you could never inherit that. In other words, you could never become a general and have a son and make him to be a general. This is the way they kept, what is that called? Corruption. They kept a meritocracy, as it's called in present times, so that you became that because of what you were, not because of who your father was. So this way, this was a very efficient way to run a country. But what this has to do with Islam is very questionable. This is political. That's why I told you, when the Prophet ﷺ left Mecca, he left with 180 people, because his message and what he taught was a spiritual message for the most part. And when he took the people off for going to Hajj at the end of his life, there were 24,000 people. So he worked for 13 years to produce 180 people, and he worked for 10 years to produce 24,000 people. Because what he did when he went to Yathrib was, yes, there was still the spiritual aspect of it, and all of that was still connected to it, but it was primarily a political, military, financial, all of those things that the President of the United States called Eisenhower warned about, the military-industrial complex. That's what it had become. That's what Medina became. And people go on and on and on about it. It's a wonderful place. I visited there many times, and it's a very sweet place indeed. But you have to understand what went on there. What went on there was the beginning of Islam, not as a spiritual movement, a school, as I talked about, to put an end of oppression and all of those things, but as another military, industrial, political complex. And that's what it produced. And the best of it was the Khulafat Rashidun. But as soon as Muawiyah declared himself to be king, that was the end of that. You were back to business. And that's what he said, we're back in business again. Bani Umayyad is back in business again. They never believed in the Prophet ﷺ then, and they don't believe in him now. And the proof of that is anybody who would take the home of the wife of the Prophet of Islam, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and turn it into a bathroom, which is what the Saudis have done in Mecca. What can you say about such people? What can you say about the people who threw gasoline on the final resting place of the mother of the Prophet, Amina, alayha salam, and burned it because they thought we were worshiping her? We don't worship her. We don't worship anybody except Allah, but we love people. We love people. And we loved Amina deeply. We loved her. There are pictures. You go on, you all have internet, go on and look at it. Look at the picture of where she used to be buried and what they did to it. They burned it to the ground. Remember what I said at the beginning of this talk today. How did we get here from there? Or how did we get here? How do we get to such a point where they would do such a thing? How did we get to the point where all of those places of those beloved members of the family of the Prophet ﷺ and other people in the Jannat al-Baqiyah were destroyed like that? And that's what I'm going to talk about a little bit, inshallah. The dramatic arrival of this phenomena called Daesh, which is sometimes called ISIS or ISIL, Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, different things like that. But in Arabic, it's called Daesh. Has shocked many of the people in the West. They talk about beheading. Well, beheading is nothing new to the West, because up until recently, the French, who, you know, they get very adamant about such things, they used to have a state policy called the guillotine, in which they killed people routinely by chopping their heads off. They'd slide their heads in and like that and cut their heads off. So that's nothing new. So that's kind of a false, thing of saying, oh, well, they are very educated people and very modern people and so on and so forth. But just until the 40s and into the 50s, they routinely chop people's heads off. So don't, really get so upset about that, because that's nothing new. Nothing new at all. But it has produced a shock, because here we're more used to them making what they call the lethal cocktail to take people's lives, until the Europeans refused to sell them those medicines anymore. And now they're going back in Utah to the firing squad and gas chambers and various other ways of killing people. Nothing new. Or people go on about, all these, dirty Muslims and how they've killed all these people. They seldom mention the 3 million people in Vietnam killed by the Americans, or the million who were killed in Cambodia by the million. They don't talk about that very much. Far more. They don't talk about the shells of spent uranium, which have condemned maybe 2 or 3 generations of people in Iraq to cancers. They don't talk about that. I think Madeleine Albright once said something too well, it was worth it. Or it's like Hillary Clinton, when she said about Assad, she said, you have blood on your hands, Assad. And she was standing up to her waist in blood as a result of the wars in Iraq and various other places. So although the people are very upset about what's happening by this thing, they really shouldn't be. It's the famous remark of Malik Shabazz, Hajj Malik Shabazz, at the time of the death of the President Kennedy, when he said, well, chickens come home to roost. Because if you do that to other people, if you kill 3 million people like that, don't you think that it's going to come back? Whoever did 9/11, don't you think that that's going to come back? I was listening to this guy in Afghanistan. He was talking and he was saying, we as Muslims, we believe in an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. This is the law of the Torah, after all, Jewish law. And we believe in this law of an eye and an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But here they've taken 100 eyes for one eye and 100 teeth for one tooth. There were no Afghans on those supposed planes that ran into the towers of 9/11. They were all Saudis, supposedly. But we didn't attack Saudi Arabia, we attacked Afghanistan. There were no Afghans on those planes, supposedly. Think about that. But we like to get upset about all of these things. We like to be perplexed and horrified of these events and the violence and its evident magnetism for Sunni youth. And think about that a little bit. We have a very good friend who's a Hafiz of Quran from Pakistan. He's about 36, 37 years old. I was talking to him, and he told me, in my age group in Pakistan, 70% of the people are out of work. 70%. And for the Shabab, those are the younger people between the ages of 21 and 33, it's higher than that. 80% are out of work. So what do you do when you're out of work and you have nothing to do and nowhere to go and nothing to put your hand to? Well, one place you go to is drugs, that's for sure. And we have the Taliban, who will take care of that, the largest drug dealers in the world, except for perhaps the pharmaceutical companies, who said that they grow poppies in order to sicken the people. This was during the Russian invasion of Afghanistan, to sicken the Russians and make them into drug addicts. This is the justification that was given for poppy growth of poppies that are turned into heroin. But if you go, as I did recently, to Pakistan, and I was in Lahore, and I passed by this bridge, and we got stuck in traffic. And I was looking around, I looked underneath the bridge, and there were all these guys shooting up and smoking dope. They had things pulled over their heads so as not to lose a wisp of smoke. Thank you, Taliban. Supposedly such good Muslims. Yes. This is what it's come to. So young people, they turn to dope. They turn to drugs. That's one thing they turn to. Another thing they turn to is killing. Killing. Oh, there's nothing like it. Give a 23-year-old or an 18-year-old or a 25-year-old a Kalashnikov and give them license to shoot whoever they want. Oh, nothing like it. And they can get dressed up in black, all in black. You know the way how kids like to dress up like Spider-Man and things like that? They like to dress up like that, scare people. Hold life and death in their hands at the age of 24 or 25. I saw a group of young boys in a city in Syria. And there was a woman who was wearing a red coat. And that was somehow considered very daring for her to wear a red coat. And these 3 or 4 kids, well, I'm 77, so I think of them as kids. These kids came up to the woman and started pestering her for wearing this red coat. And finally, one of the kids walked behind her and shot her in the back of the neck. Why? A red coat was somehow sexually alluring. But that's not what it was. It's like they want to kill people. That's what it is. It has nothing to do with Islam. It has to do with bored kids who have no job to do. That's what it really has to do with, for the most part. Oh, there are fanatics amongst them. There is always fanatics. Christian fanatics, well, we have had lots and lots of them. There are more terroristic deaths caused by Christian fanatics than there are by Muslim fanatics in America, but of course, that doesn't make news in the paper. As in Europe. So this idea of the Daesh has horrified people, but they don't, as I say, they don't really have any real reason to be horrified for it, because if you look at the number of deaths, for instance, that occur every year in America by young people, it's comparable. Comparable. Because young kids without something to do, that's what they turn to. Drugs or violence for the most part. And that's what they've turned to. Drugs and violence, or drugs and violence. If you listen to some of the interviews with members of Daesh that somehow managed to sneak out, you find that routinely they smoke dope before they engage in the killing, like these 1,700 young men who were killed in northern Iraq. The people who killed them were all stoned. They found that at the time when those other people called the Nazis used to do that in Germany. It's very hard to get somebody to kill more than 5 people a day. That's why they turn to gas chambers and things like that. There's still always inside of somebody the kind of human thing inside of them. Care for other human beings. But if you smoke a little dope or shoot up a little dope, you know, those things kind of fade away, you know, and hey, it's a gas, you know, to kill people. You can really get off on killing people, especially when you get to dress up all in black and wear those things like that, kind of like a superhero or something like that. So given all that, it appears now that when we look at it and we listen to what's coming in, that the ruling elite of Saudi Arabia is kind of divided about what's happening. Some actually applaud ISIS or Daesh or ISIL or whatever you want to call it, because they're fighting those filthy Shia from Iran. Fighting fire with fire, they say. And that, mashallah, a new Sunni state is taking shape at the very heart of what they regard as the historical Sunni patrimony that are drawn by this ideology, the Salafist, what you call takfiri ideology of the Daesh. But some of the Saudis are fearful because they recall the history of the revolt against Abdul Aziz by the Ikhwan. Now, I don't mean here the Ikhwan Muslimin, but in any case, they're beginning to get worried about this because they remember what happened back in the late 1920s. And I'm not going to talk about Wahhabis, by the way, because Wahhab is one of the beautiful names of Allah. So I don't want to call those people Wahhabis. I call them Takfiris. I didn't even want to call them Salafis, because the Salafis were noble people at the beginning of Islam, our noble ancestors. They call them Takfiris. Takfiri means somebody who can turn you into a kafir. And there's something in this thing of turning people into kafirs. Because if I can turn you into a kafir, I can kill you. Because the thing no longer applies because you're no longer a Muslim. Takfir means to kafir somebody, to make them into an unbeliever. So your blood is no longer sacred to me. Your wives are no longer sacred to me. Your money is no longer sacred to me. Your children are no longer. I can kill them all. I can steal your money. I can rape your wife. I can rape your daughters because you're a kafir, because I've takfired you. So let's call a dog, and let's call them takfiris. Let's not use that noble name of Allah, Wahhabis, anymore, because Wahhab is a noble name, and takfir is exactly what it is, a filthy name. So many Saudis are now beginning to get disturbed by these, what they call radical doctrines of the Daesh. They're beginning even to question some aspects of their own direction and their own discourse in their own country. Because indeed, inside of this place called the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, there is an internal discord that is brought about by this disturbance, because this tensions over ISIS, because who have been the main supporters of this ISIS? Really, America and England, Little Britain. We no longer call it Great Britain, we call it Little Britain. And Israel and Saudi Arabia. Oh, strange bedfellows. Look now, this bombing of Yemen on the behalf of these Saudis. And they're bombing other Muslims. And the proof that there's still other Muslims is because if you make Hajj, you find Shi'i people there making Hajj, so they must be Muslim. And call Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, men call la ilaha illallah dakhala jannah. So they're Muslim people. And this is just 6 months after what happened in Gaza, Where were the Saudis during that horrible rape and pillage and burning and murdering and killing that went on in Gaza? It's quicker to do something against the people who perpetrated those things against the people in Gaza than it is all the way to fly to Aden. They got those 69 jet fighters that the Americans have sold them. Why didn't they help their brother Muslims, since they pride themselves on being the best of Muslims? Why didn't they help them? Why didn't they help the people of Gaza? Why didn't they bomb the Israelis? They have no problem bombing the Yemenis, do they? Well, I guess that's because Yemen doesn't have an atomic bomb. And the famous discourse that took place between Begin and King Faisal. When King Faisal reminded him, he says, you know, Begin, we've got all the oil, and this world won't run without the oil. And Begin told him, he said, yeah, you may have the oil, but we got the match. Don't ever forget it. We got the match. So maybe you can understand why they didn't stand up for their fellow Muslims. They don't mind attacking and killing other Muslims, but they don't protect other Muslims. So this internal discord and the tensions over Daesh or ISIS can only ever really be understood by grasping the inherent and persisting duality that lies at the core of the kingdom's doctrinal makeup and its own historical origin. One strand to this identity pertains directly to the one who founded it, a man by the name of Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, and the use to which his radical exclusionist Puritanism was put by another man called Ibn Saud, who is no more than a minor leader amongst many of the continually sparring and raiding Bedouin tribes in the baking, poor deserts of the Nejd. This second strand to this perplexing duality relates precisely to King, quote again, King Abdul al-Aziz's subsequent shift towards statehood, because when you're of a state, you're accepted, right? In the 1920s, and his curbing of these Ikhwanis, in order that he would have diplomatic standing as a nation state with Britain and America. Yeah, recall pictures of 1944 with President Roosevelt and King Abdulaziz sitting on the American ship, dividing up the world at the time. It's been a long time happening, nothing new. Think of the opportunity of the surging petrodollar spigot in the 1970s, when it was used to channel the Ikhwani current away from home and towards export. Go to Afghanistan, boys, and fight. We don't want you fighting at home. We'll give you the money. A lot of rich Saudis, you know. We'll give you money. We'll give you weapons. We'll give you ammunition. But go someplace else and do it. We want peace at home. Go fight someplace else. Same thing goes on in America. You look at who makes up the American army. It's no longer done in a democratic way by the, draft. Now it's the rural poor and the urban poor, young men and young women who make up the army. Or people are trying to get a college education because They no longer can afford to get a college education, not understanding anymore that college education is just about worthless. People think it's worthful. It's not worth anything anymore, really. What university did Steve Jobs go to for 1 year? Or how about, what's his name, who started Bill Gates, or people like that? Or Soros. These aren't college graduates. These are people who have a will to succeed. Not a matter of school book learning. That's not where it's at. But you can take about, I don't know, 18,000, 28,000, 30 some odd $1,000 a year, depending on the university. Make somebody a slave for life. You graduate, you find yourself $58,000 in debt. You're a slave for life. That's what a college education can get you. You too can become a slave. Just get a college education. But this revolution, this cultural revolution, was based upon Abdul Wahhab's hatred for what he thought of as the putrescence and the deviationism that he saw all around him, the people worshiping Amina's grave. Nobody ever worshipped, I don't think, Amina's grave. But that's what he thought. Or Ali's grave, or any of the rest of them, as you will see from this story that I have to tell you. So he had this call, and this call was to purge Islam, sacred Islam, holy Islam, of all of its heresies and all of its idolatries. What he called, in his own words, the decorous, tobacco smoking, hashish smoking, drum pounding Egyptian and Ottoman nobility who traveled across Arabia to pray at Mecca. In his viewpoint, they weren't Muslims. They were imposters, masquerading as Muslims. And indeed, he did not even find the behavior of local Bedouin Arabs much better. They aggravated Abdul Wahhab by honoring saints, by erecting maqams, by their superstition, revering their places that they were buried. He called this bid'ah and said that it was forbidden by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that it was an innovation. And indeed, people have been doing that from time immemorial, but in any case. Like Ibn Taymiyyah, another one of them before him, he believed that the period of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ stay in Medina, not Mecca, but Medina, was the ideal of Muslim society, the best of times, which all Muslims should aspire to emulate. This is what we call Salafism. Ibn Taymiyyah had declared war on Shiism, on Sufism, on Greek philosophy. He spoke about even visiting the grave of the Prophet, ﷺ. As you know, those of you who've been to Medina, when you spend too much time in front of the maqam of the Prophet, some gruff Bedou says, "Gum, yeah, gum, ya sheikh, gum." You know, he always, you notice they always stand with their backs to him. Or they say, well, we're facing the Qibla. Oh, this is what they think. But they are the most rude, and what can you say about them? I don't know what you can say about those people who take care of the place there. They're just rude people. No nobility, no honor, no nothing. But they're fulfilling Abdul Wahhab's dream because they're protecting against bid'ah. So as I say, he had declared war on the Shias, declared war on the Sufis, declared war in general against anything spiritual or unseen or anything like that. He spoke out against the visiting of the graves of prophets, against the celebration of the birthday, the Mawlid of the Prophet ﷺ. And he said that all of this was just imitation of the Christian worship of Jesus, kind of a form of idolatry. He stated that any doubt or hesitation on the part of a believer in respect to his or her acknowledging of this particular interpretation of Islam should deprive, listen to this, it should deprive a man of immunity of his property and his life. He is the one who made it possible to kill other Muslims. Because if you do that, you do any of those things, you should be deprived of the immunity. In other words, you're no longer a Muslim and your property and life are no longer sacred. And we can kill you without even thinking about it. This is takfir. And under this takfiri doctrine, Abdul Wahhab and his followers could call other Muslims infidels if they engaged in any activity that in any way that they could say which encroached on the sovereignty of the absolute authority, which is the king. Abdul Wahhab denounced all Muslims who honored the dead, who honored saints, who spoke about the angels. He held that such sentiments detracted from the complete subservience one must feel towards Allah and only Allah. Takfiri Islam bans any prayers to saints. For instance, just not even to saints. Here we are, we're in Charlottesville. One time used to be a masjid across the street from the Zawiya. And we were left the masjid one day and we were talking about somebody in the community who was very sick, had come down very sick. From nowhere, seemingly, just came very sick. He was in the hospital, which is 2 or 3 blocks away. So I said, Fatiha, thinking that everybody read Fatiha. Bismillah alladhi la yadurru ma ismihi shay'un fil ardi wa la fis samai wa huwa as-sami'ul alim. A good thing to read Fatiha for somebody, whether they're sick or they're not sick. Oh, the guy next to me said, Bidah, brother, Bidah. What? Bidah. You can't pray for people. Allah knows their state. You can only pray for yourself. Hey, what? What could ever be wrong about reading Fatiha? But he considered it to be a terrible sin that I suggested that we read Fatiha for the sick person. So they banned these prayers. They abandoned these things. They abandoned prayers for dead people, for your loved ones, for your mother or your father or your whatever it is, your brother or whoever it is that dies in your family. They banned that. They banned any kind of trips to where they're buried or to any kind of special masajid, any kind of religious festivals, to the honoring of the Prophet's birthday, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in spite of the fact that he honored his birthday all of his life. What? What are you saying? They used to ask the Prophet, why are you fasting on Mondays all the time? And he says, because I was born on Monday. He was celebrating his birthday, wasn't he? Well, they don't tell you that, do they? So their idea was that those who would not conform to these ideas should be killed, and their wives and their daughters violated, and their possessions confiscated. That is exactly what you see that's going on with this Daesh. Exactly, 100% Mia for Mia. He demanded conformity, a conformity that had to be demonstrated in physical and tangible ways. He argued that all Muslims must pledge their allegiance to a single Muslim leader. This is like a pope in Rome. That's what they really want. That's why he called himself one of the I'm the keeper of the Haramain. I'm the keeper of the 2 Mecca and Medina. He's the Pope. He wants to be thought of as the Pope. Oh, he wouldn't say that, of course. But that's what it is. In Islam, alhamdulillah, Allah says, La ikraha fi din. There's no compulsion in religion. You know, as long as you pray, as long as you do what you think, I don't know what you think. You see 100, as Ibn Arabi once said, you see like 100 people standing, or I think he said 10 people, or 100 or 10, whatever, standing in a line praying. You don't know what they're praying, who they're praying to, what they're saying. You don't know what they're thinking about. You know nothing about it, but you accept the fact that these people are praying. That's what we accept. And that people's minds may be elsewhere. They may be thinking about other things. They may have certain idea about who Allah is. The guy next to him may have another idea about who Allah is. Person three people down may have another. It's all right. We're all praying together as best we can. But no. If you do not conform to my view, it's what they say, my way or the highway. Just what George Bush said. You're either with us or against us. There's a famous picture of him sitting with the Saudi king, as a matter of fact, with a sword over his shoulder, or dancing with him. The two birds. You wouldn't think it. Well, I guess they're both from oil families, so, maybe. Those who do not conform to this should be killed. Their wives and daughters can be violated. Their possessions can be confiscated. He wrote this. And he mentioned the list of apostates meriting death, and those included Shia people, like this masjid across the street. They kicked the Shias out. Well, they couldn't kick them out of Mecca, but they tried to kick them out of the masjid. Sufis, I'm a Sufi and I live in this town and I'm considered a dog. Sometimes I bark for people. And any other Muslim denomination who they do not consider to be Muslim at all. There's nothing here that separates this religion of Saudi Arabia from anything that's called Daesh or ISIS, only degrees. Only degrees. One ruler, one authority, and one mosque. One ruler, the king, one authority, the Bin Baz last time around, and people like that, and one masjid, Mecca. What's left of it. And it's upon this thing that the whole of this present day Sunni authority rests. And it makes ISIS, or Daesh, in all of the respects, it conforms exactly to that. And so it's become a threat to the Wahhabis. It's become a threat to them. Because it's so like them, it's even further out than they are, and now they're beginning to get scared. Let's talk a little bit about history. In 1741, after some wanderings, Abdul Wahhab, he found refuge under protection of a small-time ruler by the name of Ibn Saud and his tribe. And what Ibn Saud understood, because he was a very smart guy, he understood that in his teaching, he had the means to overturn all of Arab tradition and convention. It was a path to seizing power. That's what it was. How to get power. Their strategy, just like that of Daesh today, was to bring people whom they conquered into submission by instilling fear in them. Fear. Ibn Saud's clan took and ran with Abdul Wahhab's doctrine, because now they could do legally what they always did illegally, which was raiding other neighborhoods and villages, robbing them of their possessions, raping their women, putting their sons into slavery. And now they could do it under the whole banner of jihad. They were doing a good thing by killing their neighbors and raping their daughters. Ibn Saud and Abdul Wahhab introduced the idea of martyrdom. Look at all these guys. Can you imagine? I try to think to myself, what is in the mind of somebody who straps on a suicide vest and goes into a masjid where other people are praying and blows himself up? What could be in the mind of such a person? How could you imagine that you were doing something good, something worthwhile by killing yourself and killing all these people around you. Usually they kill 40 people, 50 people. The smallest number of people, they kill 17. They sit right there in the row, right in the second or third row. And at a certain moment, they push the button, and everybody around them is on the wall, dead, in pieces, or wounded, or injured, or burnt, or whatever. This is the way. This is what's going on every Friday in the Muslim world. People write me on Jummah, blessed Jummah to you, brother. You know, I think, yeah, Jummah is a blessed time. I love Jummah, you know. But for some people, they're afraid to even go to Jummah because they don't know that they might get killed. And in the beginning, and this is all done, as I say, under the banner of jihad. In the beginning, they conquered some small communities here and there, and they imposed their rule upon them. But by 1790, and we're talking about 1741, in 50 years, this alliance controlled most of the Arabian Peninsula, and they repeatedly raided Medina, Syria, and Iraq. Their strategy, like that of Daesh today, was to bring the people whom they conquered into submission and to instill fear in them. By 1801, right, now we're 60 years into it, they attacked the holy city of Karbala, holy to the people who, you know, think of this man, you know, Sidna Hussein as representing, you know, truth and honesty and all the good things. They did that. They massacred thousands of Shia, including women and children. They destroyed as many shrines as they could, including the shrine of Imam Hussein. Now, at that point, they attracted the attention of the Westerners in the form of a British official whose name was Lieutenant Francis Worden, who saw what was going on, because up until this was some kind of Arab thing going on. Nobody was interested in the West. And there was no oil at that time, so there was, you know, they weren't worth anything. They were just, you know, poor barefoot Arabs. And he wrote, quote, "They pillaged the whole of Karbala and plundered the tomb of Hussein in the course of the day with circumstances of peculiar and particular cruelty," as anybody who's seen any movie of the Daesh knows. They killed 5,000 people in one afternoon. Oman ibn Bishr Nejdi, who was the historian of the first Saudi state, wrote that Ibn Saud proudly documented that massacre, saying, quote, a direct quote from Ibn Saud, "We took Karbala, we slaughtered and took its people as slaves, and praise be to Allah, Lord of the worlds, we do not apologize for that, and we say, and to all the unbelievers the same treatment," end quote. Okay, that's a direct quote. Now, let's go a little bit further. Now we go to the year 1803. We've gone from 1740 to 1803, 64 years. Abdulaziz now, never mind Karbala, we're finished with Karbala, took care of the Shia. Now he entered the holy city of Mecca. Now we're dealing with Sunnis, which surrendered under the impact of terror and panic. Same happened in Medina. And at that time, Abdul Wahhab's followers demolished historical monuments, which he did then, and they're doing still today, and all the tombs and shrines in their midst. Even those were built up again, they were destroyed again. And he destroyed centuries of Islamic architecture near the Grand Mosque. And read the work of Sami Angawi from Mecca if you want to read about what actually happened. He's an engineer and a historian and everything like that. He has documented all of these things that have happened from then till now. However, in 1803, an assassin killed King Abdulaziz, but his son Saud bin Abdulaziz, as it always is, succeeded him and continued the conquest of Arabia. Ottoman rulers, because of course at that time it was the Ottoman time, and mind you, all of this was in the backwaters because there was no oil. It wasn't like the big thing. Saudi wasn't like the big thing it was today, because the only money that came in there was people coming on pilgrimage. Just as even in the time of the Kuffar, people came there to worship idols. Now people came to go to Mecca and so on and so forth like that. The people lived off of these people who came and went. That's where the money was. There's nothing called oil. Mind you, this every day in Saudi Arabia, $1 billion, 1 billion, quote, $1 billion. That's the oil revenue for one day, $1 billion. That's $360 billion a year. So when you read that the Saudis have spent $6 billion or $4 billion for propaganda, it's a drop in the bucket. Nothing. 4 days, of money. Nothing. But the Ottomans said, we can't just sit back and watch while this is all going on. And they're watching this was their parts of their empire were being devoured piece by piece. And what they were really afraid of was they jump across the canal and take Egypt. And so by 1812, the Ottoman Empire army, which was composed in that part of the Ottoman Empire of Egyptians mainly, pushed the alliance out of Medina, out of Jeddah, out of Mecca, out of what we call Hijaz. And in 1814, this inheritor, Saud bin Abdulaziz, died of fever. And his unfortunate son, Abdullah bin Saud, was taken by the Ottomans to Istanbul, then called Constantinople, where he was gruesomely executed. A reporter to Istanbul reported seeing him having been humiliated in the streets of Istanbul for 3 days, and then hanged, and then beheaded, and then his severed head was put down a cannon and fired out of the cannon, and his heart was cut out and impaled on his body. That's how they got back. Islamic behavior. This is behavior of Muslims. This is how we're told to behave. Even if it's an enemy, are we supposed to behave this way to other people who are Muslims? By 1815, so now we're from 1740, 60 years, 75 years, all of these forces were crushed by the Egyptians, who were a satrapy or a side. They were part of the Ottoman Empire in a decisive battle. And in 1818, the Ottomans captured and destroyed the Wahhabi capital of Darya, the Takfiri capital of Darya. And the first Saudi state was no more. That was the end of the first Saudi state. Yes, there were a few remaining people of these Takfiris, and they withdrew into the desert to regroup. And there they remained quiescent for most of the rest of the 19th century. It's not hard for us to understand, really, how the founding of this so-called Islamic State by Daesh in contemporary Iraq should resonate amongst those who recall this history. Like most Muslims, they don't know this. They don't know that the Saudis went in and destroyed Mecca and Medina. Some of them may know something about Karbala, but they don't know about Mecca, Medina, and Jeddah. All of the cities of the Hijaz were destroyed. Most Sunni Muslims, they don't, even Shia Muslims, they don't have any idea of what happened. They don't know that this happened. They don't know the history. They don't read the history. So they're going to repeat the history. So Al Saud, Al meaning the family of Saud, in a 20th century renaissance that began with the collapse of the Ottoman Empire and the chaos of World War I, which both from the East and the West, money flowed into these desert tribes from England, who was then Great Britain. They controlled India, they controlled Canada, they controlled, the world just about. I remember growing up in school and looking at a map, and it said England and its possessions. There's this tiny little island off this coast of Europe, and then everything else was pink. That was the English Empire, the British Empire. These people were paid that's who do you think Lawrence of Arabia was? Some like, oh, they've romanticized him like some freebooting, you know, kind of romantic, you know, I don't know, whatever. And the same Gertrude Lawrence, Gertrude Bell, and these people, and Shakespeare, a guy by the name of Shakespeare, and Kempfer, and these people on the eastern side of Saudi Arabia and on the western side of Saudi Arabia, they were paid, all of them, they were paid by the British. The British had their hand in it, as they had their hand in everything in those days. And so they had the idea that they would reinvigorate this idea of this Saudi thing like this, and they would use that, what, to destroy these Muslims, Ottoman Muslims, which they dearly wanted to do because the Ottoman Empire stood in the way between Europe and India. And India was the heart of the British Empire. The heart of the British. Yes, they owned things in, or controlled things in Africa and here and there and so on and so forth. But India, when the British went to India, India was the greatest manufacturing country in the entire world. Greatest, not manufacturing like General Motors or things like that. I mean manufacturing. Manu is from this word man, which means hand. Factor means make. They made things by hand. This was the greatest place in the world for making things. They made all kinds of things, all kinds of things. So this money fed into these two groups from the East and West to the point where this group called the Ikhwan now was the reincarnation of the early, fierce, semi-independent vanguard movement of committed, armed Wahhabi moralists who almost had succeeded in seizing all of Arabia by the early 1800s, now started the whole thing all over again in the 1914s. And by 1826, Abdulaziz began to feel his wider interest to be threatened now by these revolutionaries, the Ikhwan. And they revolted, the Ikhwan revolted. In the civil war that lasted until the 1830s, when the king put them down by machine gunning them to the man. Muslim behavior. They're both Muslims. It's the same thing we're seeing today, folks. This is a history lesson. For this, Abdulaziz, looking at what happened before, began to understand certain things, and then on top of it, oil was being discovered in the peninsula. And Britain and America, because America, you know, was a winner in World War I. Britain was not a winner in World War I. It won, but it wasn't a winner. They lost tens of thousands of young men. Young men are what make things go. And they were killed. And they began to court Abdulaziz. Yes, they continued to support Sharif Hussein, and that's how they made Jordan and Iraq and all of that. That all came out of that thing, and their deals with the French, and their deals with the nascent Jewish group called the Zionists. But they had to, and they began to develop a much more sophisticated diplomatic posture. And they changed this movement of revolutionary jihad and theological takfiri purification into a movement of conservative, social, political, theological, and religious da'wah, or call, to justify the institution that upholds loyalty to the royal, quote unquote, royal Saudi family and the king's absolute power. That's what they did. And with the advent of oil being discovered, now things went totally nuts. The French scholar Gilles Kepel wrote Saudi goals were to reach out and spread Wahhabism across the entire Muslim world. We've seen that. You're in India. India is a poor country, unfortunately, in many places. The Muslims are poor because there's a Hindu Raj, who rule the country, the Hindus. And it's hard to get things, and so, you have this small masjid somewhere and the fan isn't working. It's not going round. So everybody's hot, and bothered, Some guy comes, you don't even know, you may have never seen him before. And he said, "It looks like your fan is broken." I said, "Yeah, it's broken. Would you like us to fix it for you?" "Oh, that would be great, Could you do that for us? Fix our fan?" "Yeah, not a big problem. We'll send somebody around to do that for you." And they come and they fix the fan. "Oh, that's great." You look at that guy next time you see him. "Hey, brother, how you doing? Salaam alaikum." He's your brother, right? And he says to you, "Oh, by the way, like the last time I came, I noticed that in the room for making wudu that the faucet seems to be leaking. We could, just the way we fix the fan, we could fix your faucets for you." "Really?" "Yeah, no problem." "Okay. That'd be nice. Everybody'd like to have because, faucets that work and a fan that works, that's nice. And you get to be more friendly with this guy, and then he says to the imam one day, who runs a little school teaching kids and so forth like that, and about Islam and this and that. "How about it if we got all the kids together and we put them on a plane and we fly them and they can make Umrah, stay for 10 days. They can make Umrah. We go to Mecca, go to Medina, and back again, and 10 days. All your students." "Wow, think of that. Go to Mecca and Medina for free? Man, that's great. Especially today, how many lakhs it costs to go there, Oh. So they come back, but they didn't tell them that during those 2 weeks that they're there, they have 3 classes every day of brainwashing. Wahhabi brainwashing or Takfiri brainwashing, in which the minds are, like that. Kids come back and they're real excited, they had such a great time and like that. And then they say to the imam, "Well, that's good for the kids, but, you're doing such a good job. I think that we could arrange for you to make Hajj this year for free." Wow. Make Hajj for free? Chance of a lifetime, right? Not only that, you can bring your wife and your kids. But they neglect to tell him at the same time. Every day, 3 classes or 4 classes in Takfiri thinking, brainwashing. That's how it works. And as I say, it's a drop in the bucket. Because those people, this little exercise which I just described for you, which is done over and over again all over the world, not it's done in South America, it's done in India, it's done in Africa, it's done in America. My son got to go to make Hajj that way. He's the one who told me about what went on. This is what happens. And by this way, the minds, because like the Jesuits say, "Give me the child, I'll give you the man. Give me your kids, I'll give them back to you." That's why in America, Muslims don't understand why they're losing their children. Now, well, they send them to the American schools. What do you think? You think the teacher is favorably disposed towards Islam or favorably disposed towards the Prophet ﷺ? No way. They're either nascent Islamophobes or they're full-blown Islamophobes. That's what your kids get. That's what your kids become. And that's why 60% of Muslim youth, that means their mother and father are Muslims in America, leave Islam. The same thing, only it's a different thing. So this is what's going on. This is what's happening. And they have a free reign on it. But then what happens? Some other people come along who are even further, deeper takfiris than they are. And so when you get this mix of billion-dollar soft power projection, that's what they call it, and the Saudi willingness to manage Sunni Islam to further America's interests, that's another story which I won't go into today, as it concomitantly embedded takfirism educationally, socially, and culturally throughout the lands of Islam. Would you like textbooks for your school? We can provide them for you, published by the Fwd press. You can imagine what's in them. They bring this Western policy dependency on Saudi Arabia, a dependency that has endured since the time of Abdulaziz with Roosevelt, after the time of the Yalta Conference until today. Western, and I must say that you have to say this thing, like, if you have something. I actually went to school there for 4 years, and I saw this firsthand. So I'm not talking just through my hat, even though it has holes in it, and I can talk through it. But I'm not talking through my hat. This approach to Islam didn't die out. It never died out. It retreated after their first loss, but it came back strong. So here you have this duality that you observe, because there's some people who have become, in effect, I won't say Americanized, but I'd say internationalized into this system, and other people who are really committed to this takfiri way of thinking and see it as a means to push this thing really forward, which scares the people, the conservative people, the foreign ministers and the such like people, by this very radical, deeply takfiri strain, which many rich people support. And this Daesh movement is ultra radical in a different way. You might think of it as essentially a corrective movement to contemporary Wahhabism, a post-Medina movement. It looks to the actions of the first two Khulafa rather than the Prophet himself as a source of emulation, and it forcefully denies the Saudis' claim of authority to rule. The Daesh says, we rule, not them. And just as the monarchy blossomed in the oil age into an ever more inflated institution, the appeal of this Ikhwan message gained ground despite Faisal's modernization campaign, or the last king's modernization campaign. The Ikhwan approach enjoyed and still enjoys the support of many prominent men and women and the shuyukh and ulama. In a sense, Osama bin Laden was precisely the representative of a late flowering of this Ikhwani approach. Today, Daesh undermines the legitimacy of the king's legitimacy because we're more Wahhabi than you are. And in the collaboration management of the region by the Saudis in the West to counter socialism, Baathism, Nasserism, the Soviet and the Iranian intellectual, Western politicians have highlighted their chosen reading of Saudi Arabia: wealth, modernization, influences, and they choose to ignore this other thing. They put it to the side, but now they can't put it to the side because it's in their face. And all the more radical Islamic movements were perceived by Western intelligence services as being more effective in topping the USSR in Afghanistan in combating out-of-favor Middle Eastern leaders and states. So why should we be surprised when Prince Bandar's Saudi Western mandate to manage the insurgency in Syria against President Assad should have emerged out of that a neo-Ikhwan type of violent, fear-inducing vanguard movement of ISIS or Daesh? Why should we be surprised? I mean, I'm talking about like general people in the West, knowing little really about this, that the moderate insurgents in Syria would become rarer than unicorns. Why should we have imagined that radical Wahhabis should create moderates? Why should we imagine that the doctrine of one leader, one authority, and one masjid, submit to it or be killed, could ever ultimately lead to any form of moderation or tolerance? Again, as a disclaimer, I must thank Alistair Crook for a lot of the thoughts that he's provided, which have helped me to put this in perspective. ISIS or Daesh is a time bomb. That's what you got to understand about it. It's a time bomb. It's inserted into the heart of the Middle East, and it's growing. Just like they try to take credit for what happened in Texas last week, it's going to it'll be all over the world in 2 years. But its destructive power is not commonly understood. It is not really the march of the beheaders. It's not with the killings and the seizure of towns and villages and harsh justice, terrible though these things may be, that its true power lies. The real power, its exponential pull, is on young Muslims, the Shabab, with its huge arsenal of weapons and its hundreds of millions of dollars. Because every town they take the bank. And the bank's got the money. So they're very well organized. They have a lot of money. Their leaders are the ex-generals and so forth of under Saddam Takridi. They know how, they're no longer dealing with crazy guys who are trying to run things. They're dealing with real professional soldiers who know what they're doing. They got the money, Bismillah, and they got the firepower, and they got the young people, the young guys who have nothing to lose, because if you send them back to Pakistan, you send them back to England, you send them back to France, you send them back to Syria, to Egypt, you send them back to Turkey, you send them back to America, they have nothing, because there's no work here. No work. At least they have work there, so they stay there. So this is the real potential for destruction, because Saudi Arabia is on the point of imploding. And it is the foundation stone of the modern Middle East. And we should understand that there is almost nothing that the West can do about it. Fwd Ibrahim, a Saudi scholar, has pointed out, and most people have passed it by and totally overlooked it, it's deliberate, intentional use of its doctrine of the language of Abdul Wahhab, the 18th century founder, together with Ibn Saud, that is behind the whole thing. That's what people are listening to. This guy, Abu Umar al-Baghdadi, who claims himself to be the Khalif now, the first prince of the faithful in the Islamic State of Iraq, has formulated, for instance, the principles of this state. Among these goals is the disseminating worldwide of monotheism, which is the purpose for which human beings were created and for which they must be called to, Islam, yani. This language is exactly the language of Abdul Wahhab. And not surprisingly, the writings of Abdul Wahhab and his commentaries and his works are widely distributed for free in the areas under ISIS control, and are made the subject of study sessions, daily study sessions, like I remarked about the young people who were taken to Saudi. Only the same thing is happening now with Daesh. A generation of young men are being trained on this doctrine of loyalty and of disavowal. And it is this forgotten tradition of loyalty and disavowal, it is Abdul Wahhab's doctrine that belief in a soul or an anthropomorphic God, I use the word God, I don't use the word Allah, because they're not talking about Allah, they're talking about this modern invention called God, who is worthy of worship. And if you don't, you're not worthy to be a human being. This is what they think, in truth. A man or woman cannot be a true believer unless they actively deny or destroy any other subject of worship. That's, you saw them, just like the Wahhabis did in Afghanistan when they took down the Buddhas and so on and so forth, like that. Just like what you see that's happening in Iraq, like in so all of that thing. All of this will be destroyed. There is no such thing called the past. Remember, those who do not know the past will repeat the past. So we have to destroy the past, obviously, if we want to get ahead, right, in their way of thinking. The list of such potential subjects of idolatrous worship, which Abdul Wahhab condemned as idolatry, was so extensive that almost all Muslims at risk of falling under his definition of unbelievers. You have a picture in your house of your mom? You're a kafir. You can't have pictures of your mom in your house. You can't have them. You can't have any of those things. You have a picture of a bird? Oh, no, not possible. When I first used to go to Saudi Arabia and try to buy Time magazine, the guy would go through it with a black pen, and whenever there was a head and a body connected, they'd draw a big black line across it to disassociate it from it, right? Everywhere, anything like that. I mean, you can't imagine the quote-unquote sins. And mind you, if you commit sins, I can kill you. I can steal your money. I can steal your children. I can do whatever I want. The extreme reductionism of this vision is to hint at something entirely different, and that is its intentional adoption of this language. It is lighting the fuse to a much bigger regional explosion, one that has a very real possibility of being ignited, and should it succeed, it will change whatever we think of the Middle East as completely. And it was precisely this idealistic, Puritan, proselytizing formulation by Abdul Wahhab that was the father of all of this Saudi project. It was suppressed by the Ottomans in 1818, but it was resurrected by the British in the 1920s, became the Saudi kingdom that we know today. But since its renaissance in the 1920s, it has always carried in it this gene of its own self-destruction. And that's what you see today. For the Saudi tail has wagged Britain and the United States, while Britain and the United States thought it was wagging the Saudi tail. And paradoxically, it was a maverick British official who helped put this gene into the new state. And his name was Harry St. John Philby, who was the father of the MI6 officer who wound up as a spy for the Soviet KGB, Kim Philby. He was to become Abdulaziz's closest advisor, and having resigned as a British official, he was, until his death, a key member of the ruler's court. He, like Lawrence of Arabia, was an Arabist, but he was also, unlike Lawrence of Arabia, a convert to Wahhabi Islam who was known as Sheikh Abdullah. He was a man on the make, determined to make his friend Abdulaziz the ruler, but he was holding his coattails. And it is clear that in furthering this ambition, he was not acting on official instructions, by the way, for he encouraged King Abdulaziz to expand in northern Najd and was ordered to desist. And Abdulaziz was well aware that Britain had planned repeatedly that the defeat of the Ottomans would produce an Arab state. That's called Iraq, and this is called Jordan, and Palestine. And no doubt encouraged Philby and Aziz to aspire to becoming the new rulers. And it's not clear really what passed between Philby and the ruler, because how could we know that? But the details have been suppressed in any case. But it appears that Philby's vision was not confined to state building, but it wanted to transform the wider Islamic Ummah, or community of believers, into an instrument that would entrench Al Saud as Arabia's leaders, which it has done. And for this to happen, he had to get the Brits on his side, and later the Americans on his side. So in a sense, this guy Philby, you could call him the godfather of this whole pact, by which the Saudi leadership would use its clout to manage Sunni Islam on behalf of Western objectives, containing socialism or Baathism or Nasserism or the Soviet influence or Iran or the Shias or the Sunnis or any of that stuff, to contain it. And in turn for this, the West would acquiesce to soft power on the part of Saudi Arabia, which is what we've seen, what we've grown up with, what a guy like me has grown up with, soft power. If I ever thought like 30 years ago that I would hear of the day when the Saudis were bombing with jet planes, Yemen, I would say, come on, man, you're crazy. Bismillah, but that's what's happened. So in political and financial terms, this strategy has been an astonishing success. But it was always rooted in the British and the American intellectual obtuseness, the refusal to see the dangerous gene that lurked inside this Wahhabi project, which is Daesh, and its latent potential to mutate at any time, given the effects were right, which it is now, back to that bloody Puritan strain. That's what happened. And what we're living with is what it is. So from then until now, British and American policy is bound to Saudi aims as tightly as to their own. It's one thing. And I might say that the Israelis are just as much a part of it as I would say British, American, Saudi, and Israeli policy. They're in it together. It's called the hornet's nest. But they're deeply dependent on Saudi Arabia for directing its course in the Middle East. And the Israelis, they just want to, be able to survive. Everybody has their own game that they're playing in it. And so in political and financial terms, this strategy has been an astonishing success, taken on its own cynical, self-serving terms. For it has always taken the fact of the British and American intellectual obtuseness, because people here don't think. 25% of Americans have a passport. Let's say 15% of them or 10% of them are businessmen. The rest of them, if they've ever been abroad, they go to England, they ride on the bus with other Americans, then they take the train, they go to Paris, and they ride on the bus with other Americans. And then they may go to Switzerland, and then they may go to Rome, and then they may go to Madrid, and then they may come back to Paris, and they may come back to England, come back to America. They've never been with anybody other than other Americans the whole time. That's all they've been with. They have no idea. They have no idea. They use their passports to go to Mexico or to go to the Cayman Islands or something like that. Maybe a few of them are like hippies or like that, and they go to India or something like that. But the people here have no idea. You watch American news, which I never watch if I can ever afford, try never to watch, right? But sometimes I watch just to see what they're watching. It's all about nothing. It's all about nothing. It is a blonde girl with a low-cut dress usually, so you watch like this when you watch the news, or a guy, who's like, yelling and screaming and totally like out of his mind, or has charts or things like this. But it's not about anything. It's all about internal things that are going on in America and so on. So they have no idea. Like my postmistress, I wanted to mail something to Pakistan, and she said, to Palestine? And I said, Pakistan. Oh, Palestine? No, I said, Pakistan. And I had to write it for her. She didn't know where it was, never heard of it. This is a postmistress in a post office. They don't know about the world. They have no idea about the world. None whatsoever. None whatsoever. So this is the situation that is going on at this point. Puritan morality versus realpolitik, because there are people who do know what's going on. There are people in America who know what's going on. And they count on all the rest of the people not knowing what's going on so they can steal from them or do whatever they have to do. There are some people who actually know what's going on, but they're few and far between. The telephone, the telegraph, the internet, the machine gun, the atomic bomb, the jet plane, these are the things that have replaced anything called deen. And this is all because remember what I said in the beginning, the thing that I said in the beginning, how did we get here from there? That's how we got here. Because we didn't obey what the Prophet said in the beginning, and we took the course of the militarist, we took the course of the people of money, we took the course of the people of power, and we took that course and we wound up with that, and that's who's running it, and that's who's running Islam, and that's who's running 60, 70, 80% of the masjids in America and across the world. We are the definite minority. One dear friend of mine here who's listening to this talk today worries that they'll kill me for saying what I said. But it's the truth. That's what's going on. That's what's going on. And people, they're good people. They'll still invite you home to have tea and cookie, or what you call it, biscuit. You know, and they're good people. Muslims are good people. But they, like the Americans, they have no idea of what's going on. They have no, the ones who come here from here, they didn't come here for religion. People who came here to America from Southeast Asia and from Africa, Muslim people and so on and so forth, they didn't come here for religion. They came here to make money. And they work their butts off all the time, especially the men. And they come home and they're exhausted at the end of the day. They don't teach their children. They don't teach their wives. Their wives don't know anything. They watch TV, and that's all they know like that, and they talk with other women. And like, you know, as I'm giving this talk, there's 100 women in the back, you know, who are sitting talking to each other. They're not listening to a word I'm saying. They're not interested in what I'm saying at all. They just want to have a chance to sit and talk together again. I mean, it's understandable. So I've tried to, to explain this to you, because I think that most people don't really have an idea of what's going on, you know, in this thing. And there are certain things about this, other things I could mention, you know, that are important to understand, like why, how did the mosque get seized, or the masjid, or in Mecca in 1979, and what was that about, and who was behind that, and who was Juhayman, and who was that, and what was that all about? You know, how did that happen? And what happened there? And who was behind it? And who put up the money for it? And Bin Baz, who was the man of the time, the big alim of the time, he never really said anything about it. And then you have westernized Saudis. We meet them all the time. You know. But surprisingly enough, they still have this kind of rejectionist idea inside of them. It's because the thing is planted inside of them. And according to the Saudi-owned Al Hayat newspaper in July of 2014, which is just a year ago from now, an opinion, or less than a year ago, a poll of Saudis was released on a social networking site, which was pulled. They claimed that 92% of the target group believes that ISIS conforms to the value of Islam and Islamic law. 92% of the Saudis. We've sent hundreds and thousands of Saudis here to study in America. They've all had education. They all have television. They all have the internet. They all have all of these things. And 92% of them believes that Daesh conforms to the values of Islam and Islamic law. I find that chilling. I don't know about you. I find that absolutely chilling. The commentator Jamal Khashoggi recently warned of Saudi supporters who are watching from the shadows, saying that there are angry youth with skewed mentality and an understanding of life in the Sharia who are canceling a heritage of centuries and the gains of modernization that has never been completed. And I've seen that in Saudi. It's not completed. The standard of living in Saudi Arabia has gone down and down and down over the years. Well, it's just like in America. The rich have gotten richer, the poor have gotten poorer. We live here in America now in what you could call a fascist oligarchy. And it's the same in Saudi Arabia. That's the game that's being played. Fascist oligarchy. Very few people, 1%, they said 84 people control over 90% of the wealth in the world. That's the reality. As many people as you could fit on a double-decker bus in England control the wealth of the world, 90% of the wealth of the world. This is the reality. And these people who don't have the money, who don't have it, who haven't gotten it, who haven't gotten any lollipop as a result of this thing, they didn't get anything, who came here and they studied and everything like that, maybe they made a little extra, like my doctor. He told me one day, he was laughing, he makes over $100,000 a year. I live at poverty level because I don't want to pay taxes in America, right? He said, there's really not a lot of difference between you and me. You know, what's $100,000? It's nothing. These are people with billions of dollars, billions of dollars. That's the reality. And they have turned those who don't have that, who have no spiritual or any kind of reason that they've been taught, they've turned them into rebels. They are hijacking the minds of our children. They're canceling borders. They reject all rules. They reject all kinds of legislation, and they're throwing it away at a rate you couldn't believe for their vision of politics, governance, life, society, and economy at the end of a trigger. They are citizens of the gun, the self-declared commander of the faithful, the Khalif, who you have no choice of. If you don't want to accept him, will kill you. They don't care if you stand out among your people. They don't care if you're an educated man. They don't care if you're a lecturer. They don't care if you're a tribal leader. They don't care if you're a religious leader. They don't care if you're an active politician. They don't care if you're a judge. They don't care anything. You must obey. And you must pledge the allegiance to him. Shut Up is our reference book. What did we do wrong with 3,000 or 4,000 fighters from the Saudis already in the Daesh? He says we have to look inward to explain it. It's too late, folks. It's too late. So now they're trying to modernize the king. They've shifted, have a new king, new setup and everything like that. Have you seen the new foreign minister? He doesn't even have a beard. The present king, I mean, you can't even begin to talk about it. And it's not possible even for the people in the country. The key political question is simply to understand the simple fact of the success of Daesh. They have taken 3/4 of Syria and Iraq, or maybe not 3/4, maybe half of it. They now control it, and they're controlling more of it. And this is the full manifestation of their original pieties and the vanguardism of archetypal impulse. And this stimulates this whole thing. And this is what it is. And this is engulfing step by step, young person by young person, the entire Middle East. The Gulf that we thought of is never going to be the same again. Saudi Arabia itself will deconstruct, and the Middle East that we have known is going to become unrecognizable. That's for a person who lived for over 16 years in the so-called Middle East, myself. I can't even recognize it. It's even possible, too, for the Shia of Eastern Saudi Arabia to invoke Jafri jurisprudence and turn to Jafri Shia clerics for their rulings. And as recently as 1990, such clerics such as Bin Baz, who was the former Mufti and so forth, they have the same thing, that they say that the Shias were infidels, so there's bound to be a war between the Islamic Republic and them. And contemporary Saudi ulama regards any reforms as a provocation. And the key question to this whole thing is whether this is unstoppable. And what will happen? We are looking at a time bomb that has been tossed into the Middle East. And this bomb has been hurled not only into the Middle East, but deep into Saudi Arabia itself. And the Saudi Arabia that you thought you know is gone. Yes, they talk about reforms and things like that, but we're talking much deeper than that. And this is the difficulty. And the people in America, they don't understand diddly squat about this. Oh, yes, there are some people who do understand, but they have no voice with the government. The government thinks it's still like it was. They're sleepwalking, drifters, dreamers. They don't know what's happening. So I wanted to, in the course of this, to tell you, basically, what's happened. And how do we get here from there is the name of this talk. So now maybe you'll understand. And maybe you understand what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is to putting an end to oppression, putting an end to this. And the place that this comes is inside of ourselves. There's no other way that this comes. You have got to change yourselves. Because if you do not change yourselves and change your family, because you have families, and you don't change your neighbors, this is what is going to engulf us. And there's no doubt about it. This is what's going to happen. That's why I say don't look back, look ahead. We are living in the time of the Qayyim. This is the end. This is finished. As I said yesterday, even though it upset my friend, these people, the Sunnis and Shias, as I proved to you, I hope by what I said, they're bankrupt as Muslims. They're very much in the money, on the other hand, on the other side of things. But as what the Prophet ﷺ stood for, they're bankrupt people. They're not acting as Muslim people in any way, shape, or form. The world is faced with injustice and oppression. That's what it's faced with. That's what we're looking at. Injustice and oppression. And these young people, as I told you and tried to explain to you, the gun really draws them. In a sense of having something to do really draws them. Everybody wants something to do. We've got something to do. We have a way that we can change the world by changing people, but they have to learn to change themselves. And they have to understand that that's vital. And that is just as exciting. That. How the forces of justice can face this world that is filled with injustice and oppression and reconstruct the world order. This is what, nothing less than that. Should I say to you, the Savior, unlike what the Ithnashari Shias think, who think that this Savior, the Mahdi, is in seclusion of some sort, he's not in seclusion. He's here and he's now. He's not a prophecy. You do not have to wait for his birth. He actually already exists. We're only waiting for his inauguration. He is a specific person living among us in his real human form. He shares our hopes. He shares our disappointments. He shares our joys. He shares our griefs. He witnesses all these acts of oppression, of a persecution and injustice which are perpetrated on the face of the earth. And somehow or the other, he himself is affected by them because he could not help but be. That's why I said, I saw the mother of the young boy receiving the body of her son on the day of Eid, who had been shot leaving the masjid. Young boy, 14 years old, had nothing to do with any of this stuff. How could I not be touched by that? No matter who I am, how could I not be touched by that? So that's why I say to you, he's a real human being. He shares our hopes, our disappointments, our joys, and our griefs. He sees the acts of oppression. Anybody who's got one of these things, you can watch on it every day what's going on. You can see what's happening in the world, not just in the Middle East, South America, South Africa, Australia, Southeast Asia, Asia itself, all of it. You can see it. You just have to look and you can see it. Some people are intent upon making money, living their lives, having a career, but there's some people who are not. There's some people who this has entered into their hearts very deeply, very deeply. That's why Allah says about the Prophet ﷺ, Harisun alaykum. He's concerned about you. Ra'uf Rahim, he's friendly to you. He's merciful to you. He cares about what happens to you. This is the thing. He is anxiously awaiting the moment that he will be able to extend his hand to everyone to have any wrong has been done to. And he will be able to eradicate injustice and oppression completely, because the hand of Allah is above his hand. This man is living among us, and he's waiting. It's not yet ordained for him to proclaim and disclose his identity. Believe that the idea of absolute eradication of all forms of injustice and oppression, this is what we're working for. We owe allegiance to no tyrant, no president, no king, no prime minister, no caliph, no matter what. We have no allegiance to any of them. We owe allegiance to no tyrant whatsoever. That's what the Prophet said to some men. He said, you can put the sun in one hand and the moon in the other, I'm still not buying. You can't buy me, I'm not for sale. Look. Wait for him. Look forward to him, and at the same time work on yourself, purify yourself, clean yourself. Because as Imam Jafar alayhi salam said, don't expect that he's going to come and clean up. You got to clean up. You got to clean up, first of all, yourself. You got to clean up your family. You got to clean up where you live. That's what you got to do. That's what everybody's got to do. That's a job that can be done. It's something that can be done. We have the capability. We don't have to have money to do this. We don't have to have bombs to do this. We don't have to have submarines to do this. We don't have to have jet planes to do this. We can do this simply just as we are. Allah has given us what we need to bring this about in ourselves and around us. We find the concept of the living Mahdi will give, once you understand it, an impetus to the idea of an expected helper who has made it a source of effective strength and consolation to every human being who is suffering from deprivation and injustice. This person rejects all forms of tyranny because he knows that his Imam and then his leader is alive and contemporary and not a future idea. He is somebody who shares your suffering and he feels your misery. And all he asks you to do, clean up yourself as he's cleaning up himself. Clean up your family and clean up amongst the people you live with. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Allahumma salli wa sallam wa barak ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala ali Sayyidina Muhammad wa sallam tasliman kathiran fi kulli waqtin wa heen.